What's lost on it?
Okay. Hello. Good afternoon, and welcome to a special series, a collaboration called Let's Talk African American Gardens. I am thrilled to be able to start this series and start this collaboration with one of my favorite museums in the world. My name is Cindy Brown. I'm Manager of Collections, Education, and Access at Smithsonian Gardens. And this collaboration has come out with a joy for gardens, a joy for history, and a joy for highlighting our African American gardeners. But it all started with a very special woman, Carla Thomas McGinnis, who is, and I'm reading this because your title is so long, Assistant Director of Council Operations and Special Initiatives. So this is a special initiative of Carla's, and I'm thrilled that we could do it together. And Carla is going to introduce us to our speaker. But before we do that, I have a bit of housekeeping. Please remember to put your questions in the chat box. And then after the presentation is finished, Carla and I will come back on and we will curate those questions. And I know she has a couple, and so do I, that we want to ask our speaker. So we might take some time as well to be able to share more information with you. So Carla, without further ado, will you tell a little bit about this project that we're working on and why you wanted to do it, and then who's today's guest is?
Yes, thank you, Cindy. Thank you so much. I am thrilled to be here. I'm thrilled to be here with you and our special guest today. The National Museum of African American History and Culture has engaged in a garden project, and we've been working very closely with Smithsonian Gardens to do that. And so you all may have seen the garden that we grew this growing season, our Horace Pippin garden, which you will see a return in the spring. But in particular, I'm excited about this Let's Talk African American Garden series because it's an opportunity for us to explore the handbook of the Negro Garden Club of Virginia. I have a printed copy, well-loved copy here, but it was published 80 years ago. In 1943. It has a opening letter from Eleanor Roosevelt that she wrote back in May 16th, 1942. And so this handbook is full of wonderful content that we will get to explore through this series. And today we get to launch it with Debra Freeman. I am so excited that you are here. Debra Freeman is an award-winning writer and podcaster. Her podcast, Setting the Table, recently won 2 different awards. One, the Best Food and Drink from Signal Awards. And then she won the Podcast of the Year from the International Association of Culinary Professionals. And very excitingly, she is the new food editor for Style Weekly, which makes her the first African-American woman in the South to lead a food section for a major publication. And she is here with us today. And thank you so much. I want to turn it over to you and let you get started.
Yep. So, Deb, once you get started, we're going to disappear, and but we'll be here. We're listening. So if you have any problems, just let us know, and we'll try to help you solve them with our great technology ability. And we're looking forward to it. So thank you. And I'll disappear. Carla, you can disappear, and we'll come back at the end. Thank you.
Thank you guys so much. It's such an honor to kick this series off, and I'm so excited to talk about the resilience of Black gardens. I am just going to go ahead and share my screen. I've got a lot of great slides for you guys, so give me one sec to go full screen. All right, and so today we're going to be talking about the legacy of the Black Garden. As a starting point, I think it's really important to note that while we often think about gardens as therapeutic today or as a hobby, and that is true, but for enslaved African Americans in particular, it was a source of food, and it was an absolutely crucial source of food, as things were planted to supplement the rations that they were given by their enslavers. So in that regard, food really becomes a form of resilience and a method of survival. And so obviously what I'll talk about today is not all encompassing because, as you guys surely know, that based on where you are, different things grow better than others. So this is just kind of a broad example. And so it's not necessarily monolithic. And so I mentioned those first 2 points, but thirdly, I think it's something that's really important to know before we even get started, and I kind of want to keep y'all to keep this in the back of your mind, is that enslaved people often had to tend to their gardens at night. And so think about that. If you're working sun up to sundown, literally, that is not hyperbole. If you're working sun up to sundown, then after you're done, you then have to do it by moonlight and by fire. And so I wanted to share this photograph with you. This is Michael Twitty. He's a James Beard Award-winning author and historian. And so this is taken actually in colonial Williamsburg in Virginia. And so this is just a representation. It's a great photo, but just kind of think about that they are doing this work all day long, and then at night, they are harvesting for food. So just kind of want you guys to keep that in mind as we go through this presentation. So what's in a typical Black garden? And again, this is not all encompassing. These are just a few examples. But first we'll talk about collards. So collards are not native to the United States. They are Eurasian in origin. And ancient Romans and Greeks actually ate them thousands of years ago. And there are a couple different theories on how this becomes prevalent in the American South. One theory is that collard seeds may have been brought over from Portugal in the early 18th century, or from the British Isles to the early colonies. But the most common theory is that enslaved Africans introduced them to the region, since collard greens were a staple crop in many parts of Africa. Historian John Edgerton, in his 1987 book, Southern Food, declared, quote, "From Africa with the people in bondage came new foods, and so okra, black-eyed peas, yams, and of course, collard greens." And so there are 20 main varieties of collards that you'll see, but there's 5 that are common that you'll come across either in grocery stores or farmers markets and that sort of thing. So that'll be the Georgia green, the champion, the Vates, Moore's heading, and green glaze. This one, however, is not any of those. This one is the yellow cabbage collard, and it's actually my favorite collard. You can only find this in one place, and that's in a tiny town of Ada, North Carolina. It's much milder than other collards, but it's delicious. And so this typically is where you can go to find it if you don't know someone who's growing it. This is the Collard Shack in Aden. And so it's right next to Skylight Inn. And if anybody is a barbecue enthusiast as well, they'll know that Skylight Inn is one of the greatest examples of North Carolina barbecue. So you can get your collards and your barbecue in the same place. But if you're ever in Aden, North Carolina, or close to it, I highly, highly recommend that. So about 5 years ago, this is a photo of Ira Wallace. About 5 years ago, she and the members of the Seed Savers Exchange, they asked the USDA for over 60 varieties of collard greens. She wanted to plant them in Iowa. And she got the idea when she saw photos taken by Edward Davis for the book Collards, A Southern Tradition from Seed to Table. And that book is about how 2 geography professors basically traveled throughout the South looking for heirloom collards. And so after she saw those photos, she decided to start a program to save these heirloom collards. And she created the Heirloom Collard Project, which has several goals. Seed preservation, documenting stories of still living seed stewards, and perhaps more importantly, providing seeds to companies and gardeners interested in growing these heirloom varieties. Participants in the collard green trials, their whole purpose is to grow and record data about the collard greens, and that will preserve varieties for the next generation. This is John Jackson of Comfort Farms. That's out in Mitchellville in Georgia. They are currently growing 20 different collard varieties. And so Jackson is a former US Army Ranger, and he employs veterans to grow heirloom vegetables and to also raise heritage animals. And so when I interviewed him for an article on collards, he said, quote, "I'm growing collards in a state of empowerment. When we talk about how to connect Black folks to our culture, the one thing that wasn't ripped away is the food that we brought with us. That food is the bridge for who we are as a people." I think that's a great quote. Next is fish peppers. And so this is largely, you'll find this in the mid-Atlantic. Although the exact origins of the fish pepper are unknown, it is widely believed that it came from somewhere in the Caribbean, arriving in the US in the late 1800s. Historian Michael Tway, who you saw in that photo earlier, believes that fish peppers were brought to the Baltimore, Maryland area by Haitians, and they soon began to crop up in gardens, kitchens, and produce markets throughout the city. African Americans all along the Chesapeake Bay began to plant the peppers in their gardens, and Black caterers and cooks often used the pepper in seafood dishes. And the really cool thing about this is that 1 out of every 50 or so fish peppers lacks chlorophyll and remains pale. So those peppers were really popular for dishes and that had cream base. And so it was kind of like a secret ingredient that Black chefs would use. Now, fish peppers were not only used to season food, although that was obviously one of the uses. They were considered a powerful remedy for joint pain, and were employed to discourage bugs from destroying tobacco plants, which is also incredibly important. According to oral history, that apparently enslaved people rubbed fish peppers on their feet in order to disguise any scent and to throw off dogs who tracked them as they escaped to freedom. Now, by the early 1900s, the fish pepper nearly became extinct, but then Horace Pippin came along. And so Horace Pippin was a Black painter who lost the use of his right arm while serving in World War I, and he began to suffer from arthritis. He resorted to seeking out bee stings for relief, which interestingly enough was a very popular remedy at the time. And he began exchanging seeds for bees from H. Ralph Weaver, who was a neighbor of his who happened to be a beekeeper. Weaver ultimately saved the seeds, and in 1995, his grandson, William Weaver, found baby jars full of seeds in his grandfather's freezer. He shared the seeds with Seed Savers Exchange, and now every seed that's purchased today can be traced back to this man right here. And so he was an incredibly talented painter. This is School Studies, which it can be seen in the National Gallery of Art. This is another From War to Peace. This is on view at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. And so another way that you can taste it, if you guys are anywhere near Baltimore, if you go to Woodbury Kitchen, they have snake oil, which is made from only 3 ingredients: fish peppers, cider vinegar, and sea salt. And this is excellent. Farmer, cook, and agricultural educator Denzel Mitchell, he became aware of the fish pepper in 2008 and started working with Woodbury Kitchen and created dry seasoning, which they are sold out of, but also the hot sauce that you see here with the peppers. And each plant in each bottle of pepper sauce is a physical embodiment of the legacy of Black culinarians in America. I also interviewed him, and Mitchell said, quote, "This is really a crop that has sustained by Black people. That in and of itself is powerful. I have to keep this legacy alive." Next, we'll talk about okra. Okra probably arrived in the US between 1710 and 1730. By 1760, it was being documented in botanical gardens and journals, and Thomas Jefferson referred to it as a common vegetable. We know that enslaved people grew it in Monticello in their gardens, and in 1780, it was incredibly commonplace on Southern kitchen tables. It was often used to thicken soups and stews, and about 100 years later, during the Civil War, enslaved people used seeds and scraps to make okra coffee. And according to historian Michael Twitty, quote, they would sell it to Confederate soldiers who were running out of their coffee rations. Obviously, we get the word gumbo from the West African term for okra, which is ngobo. And so obviously, this is something that we talk about, eat, and are very familiar with today. A lot of people are not fans of okra because the texture can be slimy. I happen to be one of those people, but it is an incredibly nutritious vegetable. It contains vitamin C, vitamin K, it decreases heart issues and stroke by preventing blood clots. It's also a good source of magnesium, vitamin A, and vitamin B6. So I imagine the slime is worth it. If you are interested, in learning about okra and taking a super duper deep dive, I highly recommend this book by Chris Smith, The Whole Okra, A Seed to Stem Celebration. Chris actually works with the Collard Green Project, and he's actually doing something similar for okra varietals as well. So black-eyed peas, I'm sure most of you guys know that it's not a pea, it's actually a bean. They have been grown in Virginia since the 17th century by African slaves. Black-eyed peas made the journey to America on slave ships, and the bean was brought on board from West Africans, essentially to feed enslaved people who made the long journey across the Middle Passage. In Africa, black-eyed peas would have been either boiled and eaten with rice or fried and eaten with rice and fried plantains. Once in America, black-eyed peas were planted by enslaved people in their gardens, and they were often used in soups, stews, and fritters. And so one of the most popular ways, and I'm sure most people have heard of this, most popular way to eat this is the Hop and John dish, which you see here. The earliest recipe for this can be found in an 1847 cookbook, A Carolina Housewife, which was written by Sarah Rutledge. Most recipes for Hop and John call for cooking the black-eyed peas with rice, pork, and seasonings. Sometimes you can add hot sauce, you can add chopped onions, and there's actually a tradition of eating black-eyed peas for good luck and prosperity in the new year. We're not exactly sure where that comes from. The theory on that is that enslaved people ate black-eyed peas when the Emancipation Proclamation became effective on January 1st, 1863. Another theory is based on the Southern phrase, quote, eat poor on New Year's and eat fat the rest of the year. And that's grounded in the belief that black-eyed peas were for poor people. So next we'll talk about sweet potato. Obviously, sweet potato and yam, that term is used interchangeably. They absolutely are not the same thing, as you can see from this photograph. They are sort of similar, but very different. Spanish traders brought sweet potatoes worldwide in the 1600s, including to West Africa. They were accustomed to the textures and flavors of native root tubers, such as the yam. Initially, when they were brought to America, they did not enjoy the taste of the sweet potato. But that's, but again, at that point, you kind of have to do what you have to do and eat things that you may not normally eat because you have to sustain yourself. Yams can grow to the size of an arm or a leg. It's hairy. I'm not sure if you can see that in this photo, but yams are pretty hairy. And the taste of it is similar to a russet potato. That's what I would compare it to. It's much more fibrous. It's white on the inside, not yet orange like a sweet potato is. And it cannot grow in a non-tropical climate. Slavers regard the crop, as they did the people who they aimed to make chattel, wretched and expendable. Quote, in their own countries, the Negroes in general live on animal food and filth with roots, yams, and Indian corn. And that's that's a quote from a British physician who trafficked in slavery, and that was from 1788. So when enslaved people were in America, sweet potatoes did grow very well, particularly in the South because of the heat. They were similar enough to yams that they knew how to prepare them. You'll see candied yams on menus probably in almost any Southern restaurant. It's a lie, obviously. You're not eating candied yams, at least not in America. But they are delicious. And so here's a photo of candied yams in case there are some folks who are not from the South and maybe have not had them. They are very, very sweet. Sometimes people, use marshmallows with them, but it's a big treat at Thanksgiving. The other popular way that the sweet potato is served is sweet potato pie. Now, what we know of sweet potato pie today, that was not something that enslaved people ate. That was made for their enslavers. African Americans, they created a crustless sweet potato dessert that had molasses and spices, and that was often cooked in a hearth. In his 2013 book, Soul Food, the culinary historian Adrian Miller details how enslaved chefs were taught, quote, the latest developments in French cuisine to appease their owners. The chefs then combined the Parisian practice of sugaring vegetables with their own cooking instincts, and that was the earliest form of candied yams. And nearly all of the first cookbooks that were authored by Black people in America feature recipes for sweet potatoes. So this is a copy of Melinda Russell's 1866 text, A Domestic Cookbook. The root appears in a, quote, baked pudding along with eggs, sugar, butter, cream, and nutmeg. In the seminal 1881 cookbook, What Mrs. Fisher Knows About Old Southern Cooking, Abby Fisher lists a sweet potato pie recipe that includes butter, egg yolks, sugar, and orange juice. And then the 1911 cookbook, Good Things to Eat, Rufus Estes offers 2 recipes for sweet potatoes, and not surprisingly, both involves sugar and butter. Next, we'll talk about watermelons. Watermelons can be traced back to Africa, more specifically the Sudan, and many of the other crops we've talked about, much like those, they were brought to America during the slave trade. Watermelons were originally cultivated for their high water content, and they were stored to be eaten during dry seasons, not only as a food source, but they were originally used as a method of storing water. After the Civil War, watermelons became used as propaganda against recently freed African Americans as they were being grown as a source of income, and racists began using the watermelon as a stereotype for Black people as having an insatiable appetite for them and also as a symbol of laziness. Fortunately, that stereotype has died out. And I personally like to look at watermelons in particular as a symbol of resilience. And so I'd like to talk about a couple of my favorite varieties. First up would be the Odell's White watermelon. The Odell's White is really special because it's the only commercial watermelon that can be attributed to an enslaved person. His name was Harry. He was enslaved in a small town in South Carolina. And so eventually it becomes known as the Odell's White because there were growing competitions, much like they are today, who can grow the biggest, fruit of some type. And so during one of those competitions, a man named Odell White, he grew a very, very large version of this. And so that's how that's how it got its name. I was fortunate enough to find this from a grower in Virginia. There was literally only one grower in the entire state. So these are a little rare, a little difficult to find, but they are incredibly delicious. It's a really, really great watermelon. This is an ancient crookneck. And as you can see, it has a little bit of a different shape. What's really interesting about this is that seeds were found in a cave in Arizona, and legend has it, and I don't know if this is true or not, but the handle, the stem of the watermelon originally grew, and Native Americans were able to use that and kind of hang them on horses as they traveled. I don't know if that's exactly true, but I do know that when we grew them out, they did have a little bit of a hook at the top that was more pronounced than most watermelons. This is the moon and stars on the left, and on the right are the seeds. As you can see, the large yellow dot, that is the moon, and you'll see other yellow sprinkles throughout the melon, and those are the stars. The interesting thing about this, once I started to get into heirloom vegetables and heirloom fruits, I did not realize that watermelons were not perfectly round. I had grown up obviously eating watermelons from, the grocery store, and thought that they didn't basically look like cucumbers. I'll show you another photo. You can kind of see this was the original shape for them. And I remember showing them to friends, and they would be like, "Are you growing massive cucumbers? Like what on earth is this?" But this is what watermelons used to look like. Had zero idea. So that was really revolutionary for me. And finally, the red and sweet watermelon. This is absolutely hands down my favorite melon. I think this might be a better picture. If you can see how red this watermelon, the flesh of that watermelon is, this is not Photoshop. This is not lighting or a bad photo. Is actually that color. About 2 years ago, you could only find it in one place. You can only find it in Monroe, Louisiana. And so thanks to this man, horticulturalist Carrie Hefner, we can find them in different places. Essentially, he was giving a presentation on heirloom apples at a library, and a woman came up to him after his presentation, and she mentioned that she had watermelon seeds in her freezer, and if he would come by, she would be more than happy to give it to him. He went to her house to pick them up, and in the box were these red and sweet seeds, which up until this point, 2.5 years ago, it just did not exist. No one was growing it. You couldn't buy it commercially. And if you see here in the picture on the left, the top left, that's the canister that the seeds were in. And on the right, that's how seeds were kept in this freezer. And so Carrie was super excited and enlisted some local farmers to grow them out. And that summer, I went down to Monroe, Louisiana. I literally drove 2,000 miles to taste this watermelon. And really, it was absolutely fabulous. We grew them out the following year, which would have been last year, and we were able to seed save and get those into the hands of growers across the country. And so now, there are many people in Monroe who are growing it out, but also folks in Virginia and Maryland, all throughout the country. And even my dad in Hawaii is actually trying to grow one literally right now. And so if you take a look in the lower right-hand corner, those are the seeds from the red and sweet. And if you look at the photo next to it on the left, that's how Carrie categorized it. One of those actually grew to be about 42 pounds and still maintained its sweetness, still maintained its texture. So really, really special fruit. And so if you'd like to hear more about African-American food, highly recommend, obviously, my podcast, Setting the Table, wherever you get podcasts. We do talk a lot about Black farming and agricultural purposes, as well as a variety of other things. And if you'd like to follow my work, I have a lot of written work on my website, which is deb-freeman.com. And I also am on Instagram at Audiophile Girl, where I obviously take photos of what I'm working on and interesting things that I'm excited about. So I'm happy to take any questions that folks may have, and looking forward to hearing y'all's thoughts and questions.
Deb, thank you. But I never want to do this again before lunch. I'm hungry.
I'm actually hungry now too.
Well, you're getting lots of love icons through the website or through the Zoom. So thank you for all of that. That was a great run through history. And so many of our favorites appeared, which I am so enthusiastic about, because they have such a great history as well as a great place on our plates, which I enjoy. So there is one question, and we usually don't share information on where you can find things, but I think it's so important that people understand where they can find some of these seeds. Where do you suggest that they go besides Southern Exposure Seed Exchange?
Yeah, I think Baker Creek Heirloom Seeds, I think that they have a lot of heirloom, they have a variety of seeds, but they have a pretty good stack of heirloom vegetables and fruits that you guys can try. Those two, probably in my mind, Southern Exposure and Baker Creek, those two really are doing an excellent job in preserving heirloom seeds and making them available to the public.
They really are. People are asking all kinds of questions about how do you save seed. And there's some great books out there too. Seed Savers is a great book that I've used in the past. No, you don't want to necessarily freeze your seeds. That was one of the questions that came up. Commercial places do, because they reduce the amount of moisture in a seed. But I have mine in my refrigerator. I don't know about you.
Yeah, we actually froze ours. We did.
Mhm.
And so we weren't sure what was going to happen, you
Mhm.
know, but luckily enough that worked out. And another way that they were preserved, we kept them in airtight jars in a cool, dark place, basically a closet, and on the floor of a closet. And that seemed to do pretty well as also. So yeah.
Yeah, seeds are pretty resilient. There are only a couple seeds that don't like to be stored. Parsnips. I don't know if you've ever tried to grow parsnips, but they don't like to be stored. So they would like to know your favorite collard greens name again. The
Yeah.
yellowish one.
Yep, that is the yellow cabbage collard. And again, it's much milder. You don't have to cook it as long, which is nice. And it is absolutely, oh my God, absolutely delicious.
I'm trying, there's a lot of questions popping up, so I'm trying to go. But Carla, why don't you ask your question? I know you have one for Deb that you're going to ask everybody.
Yes. Yes, and there are a lot of questions in the chat. But one question that I have, because it's a section in the book, in the handbook, one chapter is called Books You Should Read. And you did mention several books already in your presentation, but I wonder what other book you might say we should read, maybe one of your favorites that you want to share with us today.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are actually two, and they're both by the same author. They're both by Tony Tipton Martin. Highly recommend, highly recommend the Jemima Code, which goes through Black cookbooks, and you know, the amount is absolutely astonishing, and the breadth of different types of food that are in there is really incredible. And I will also recommend Jubilee, her other book, which really walks through African American food. Highly recommend those two books.
Okay.
Excellent.
That is very good. I'll have to get them on my shelves. Add it to the pile that I have. I can never read enough about food. And someone asked that, or is there something like a food historian? And yes. Oh, very good, Carla. You're ahead of the game. I like that. But yes, there are food historians. And I think, Deb, you would make a great food historian working for a museum. We were talking about this earlier, so who knows what's in your future. And are you familiar with Ujamaa Food Cooperative? Did I say that correctly, Carla?
The Ujamaa Food
Ujamaa.
Farming Alliance or Collective. Yeah.
Yeah, we're trying to get Benita as a speaker. So Deb, what do you know about the group?
Yeah, I don't know, a whole lot. I'm not an expert, but I have heard of them and their work in really trying to preserve heritage, culturally relevant food. And so the work that they're doing is so admirable. And please let me know if y'all get her to speak, because I'm signing up.
Yes.
She's hard to tie down.
And they are a part of the Collard project that you were mentioning. They
cool.
They have those seeds, yeah, and they have something called, collards for kids, where they
Mm,
go into schools and students grow different varieties of collard greens so they can learn about biodiversity.
that's so
Mm,
awesome. That's
So
mhm.
awesome.
more to come, everybody. We're gonna get more into that, in this series in the months to come.
Right. There is a good question. And I think it's so important, and it goes back to how you're storing your seeds. This gentleman lost a patch of or a batch of black-eyed peas to weevils. What do you suggest to help prevent? Because the weevils are on the seeds when you're collecting them. What do you suggest?
Well, I mean, that's really difficult. A lot of times it's just, making sure they're super clean, and making sure that they are rinsed really well. Sometimes you can't, it's the luck of the draw. Sometimes you can't help that, unfortunately. We were really fortunate that I think we were scrubbing the seeds with water and a toothbrush to be really, really anal retentive about it. But yeah, that's what I have found worked really well is just keeping them incredibly clean, just trying to get them as clean as possible.
Right. And here's a question too, and I know the answer already because you told me ahead of time. Are there herbs that are culturally relevant to the African American community?
Yeah, so I did a lecture on Black herbalism, and so cottonseed, for example, helped a lot with women's monthly issues, and leaves. That's something that helps with burns and cuts. Wormwood. I could really go on and on. I would recommend there are a couple of books. I think there's two books on Black herbalism, and they list out really just probably maybe 100 or so different plants that you guys can look at that are grown in America, and people were really able to effectively use these herbs to heal themselves. And so they were growing things not just for food but for medicinal purposes. And interestingly enough, even though they were able to figure that out, what plants were good, for certain ailments, unfortunately, that was illegal at the time. And so, honestly, the punishment was death, particularly in Virginia. And so there were women who were basically punished by, who died basically trying to save others, unfortunately. But it's a very important practice that I think is starting to get a little bit of light, and people are starting to talk about that now. But there's a very long legacy of Black herbalism.
Mhm. So we'll have to explore that more in a future presentation for sure. And if you're lucky enough to live down by Lewis Ginter, Deb is a speaker. She has a series of classes down there. So you can always join one of those classes as well and learn more about this. One of the questions too, I thought was really important. What would you suggest as the best way to make certain this important food history is passed on across generations, besides appearing with us today?
Well, obviously, no. But I think that really it's about talking about it, and not kind of, I've written an article about how, a lot of African American history and culinary history is oral, and a lot of relatives want to gatekeep, you can't know what's in my, macaroni and cheese recipe, or you can't know what's in my collard greens recipe. But unfortunately, that when they pass away, that goes with them, and that there's a legacy there. There's an importance there. And so I think just talking to relatives about these things who are older in your family and keeping those traditions alive. A friend of mine is actually going to the folks and writing the recipes down so that they can keep those recipes in their families, and just talking about it, reading about it, writing about it. That's really my goal, my major goal when I started writing about food and talking about food, was really to put these things in print or to put them out into the world, and so that they aren't kept hidden. There are so many really amazing culinary stories that exist, but until you talk about it, till you write about it, no one knows.
Boy, that is so true. Carla, is there any, I feel like I'm reading off. I want to make sure you get questions asked too.
Yeah, I'm following the chat too. Diana says, yeah, her mom and grandma and aunties, we don't write recipes down. There were some questions that came in the chat as you were talking about watermelons. There was one about the, does what is, I think, shape matters about watermelon. There was a question about like how long were watermelons able to be stored? And one question that I have is, why do you think it was watermelons that was the crop used to be stereotype African Americans? I think about the fact that it's like watermelons are kind of hard to grow. It takes a lot of resource, time, and patience to grow. So wondering why you think it was watermelons that was used as the
Yeah.
stereotype.
So I think, well, where it started in Birth of a Nation, in that film, African Americans were shown eating fried chicken and watermelon in a really negative, gratuitous way. And so that's kind of where all of that stigma and postcards kind of comes from. I think that really it happened because racist people saw that Black people were able to make a living and make money growing this stuff. And that was not acceptable because, obviously once you have money, you can do things for yourself. You're not dependent on anyone else. And so I really think that people, and fried chicken goes right along with it, with watermelon. Both of these were tools to, feed their families, to put food on the table, literally. And that was unacceptable. So I think that, seeing that kind of self-resilience and entrepreneurial spirit, that was something that had to be shut down. And so I think that those two, those were very easy ways to stereotype Black people. So I think that's kind of where that comes from.
That makes sense. I mean, it speaks to why it was illegal to use, these plants in healing ways as well. Like both of these are acts of resistance, as one of our participants commented in the chat.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree. But it's so important. It is one of the best ways to be self-sufficient, to be able to grow your own food, to be able to save your own seed from those plants and continue the history that goes along with that. I appreciate the advances that we've made with seeds and to be more disease resistant, but I always go back to the fact that if you want to be self-sufficient, if you want that self-resilience, grow the historic seeds, keep them in line with your family so that you can pass them down from one to the other, because that is going to allow you to eat for the rest of your life. You don't have to be reliant on anyone else. So that's a very good point. Very good. And it could be scary to people that don't want you to be self-reliant or self-sufficient.
Yep.
We won't name names of companies right now, but I hope they're listening. So yeah.
There was a question about resharing the fish pepper and how it was used. Rose is thinking about the plant cesters and how it aided Black liberation.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that in two ways. One, if this oral history is correct, thinking about using it on, enslaved people's feet to run away and to create better lives for themselves. I think that that's incredible to me, that if that actually happened. And so I'm looking for, primary sources to back that up, because I really want that to be true, to be honest. And also I think that, for Black caterers and Black cooks to recognize, oh, if I put this ingredient in this dish, this becomes my trademark. No one can really figure out what it is. You can't see it. This usually was in a cream-based dish. So, they are using that as their selling point. And so by doing so, they get more business, they make more money. And so I think both of those ways speak to that.
Mhm. I agree. It's one of the most beautiful peppers that you can grow. And Carla enlightened me on the fact that Horace Pippin was an artist as well. That was something that I hadn't heard before. I didn't run into. And it's so fascinating to think that he fell in love with those peppers because not just the culinary use, but because of the beauty of those peppers and the beauty that it brought in the eyes of him as an artist. So,
Well, yeah, I
yeah.
mean, yeah, and he was able to trade those, because he needed the bee
Mhm.
stings. That he believed that the bee stings were going to heal him. I'm still not sure how that works exactly,
Yeah.
but but it was really, I think advantageous that his neighbor was a beekeeper and that he decided to just keep them in his freezer. They were literally kept in his
Yeah.
freezer in
Yeah.
baby jars. So
Mhm. Exactly. Well, this is a great question. Can you talk a bit about Tuskegee Institution's contribution to African American food culture and science?
yeah, I mean that could be a presentation in and of
Okay.
itself, honestly. Obviously the very first thing that I'm going to talk about is George Washington Carver, and people, I think, really, when they think about him, it's peanut butter, which is true. I mean, obviously, but I think that people don't necessarily recognize that his research and his work literally saved the peanut crop, literally. And so without that, there are so many farmers, Black farmers included, who would have been absolutely devastated and wiped out if not for his work. And so, peanuts also, I can't exactly remember because I'm still doing a little bit of research on it, but I know that peanuts have some medicinal uses as
Mhm.
well. And so he was able to figure that out as well. And so, like, I think he's probably the greatest example of that.
Yeah. Now
Amazing.
they're encouraging parents to give peanuts and peanut butter to their children from the time that small amounts from when they're very young, 6 months or so. And one of the medicinal qualities is it helps prevent all types of allergies, not
Mm.
just the peanut allergy. So I don't know if he knew that, if that's what was
He
in his work
he
or not.
probably did.
Yeah. Yeah.
He listened to plants. Like he was a plant whisperer from what I could tell.
I think that's a great. I want to grow up to be a plant whisperer.
We have a couple of other questions I wanted to make sure we got in there. Marion asked, she grew up in Arkansas. She's an Arkansas native, and she grew up eating mustard and turnip greens, but didn't actually eat collard greens until she attended college in Florida. So
Mm.
she's wondering if you can share any insights on why certain varieties of heirloom greens are less or more available in certain regions or parts of the country.
Yeah, I mean, I think there might be a couple of reasons for that. I mean, one obviously is how does it grow, right? So,
Mhm.
that the yellow cabbage collard in Ada, North Carolina is not necessarily going to grow as well in Mississippi or Florida or even Virginia, to be really
Mhm.
honest with you.
Mhm.
And so I think it really, location and soil and climate, that has a lot to do with it. And I think the other piece of it, which is probably a bit of a lesser contributor, but still a contributor, is what seeds were there and abundant in that particular area. And so if it was mustard versus collards, then that was what was prevalent, then that's what you planted. So I think it's probably a combination of those two things.
That's a really good point, Deb, because it's heirloom doesn't mean it's heirloom across the country.
Right.
It's very specific to a region. And you're right, it's the soil, it's the weather, it's the water quantity. All of that really helps drive the taste, the flavor that's in that plant. I think we forget that. We try to grow everything everywhere.
Yeah.
And I think that we are kind of, facing something new here with the climates changing in
Mhm.
places. And so there's
Mhm.
crops that used to thrive in places that aren't now, and some that wouldn't grow, that now can grow in certain climates. It's
Or that's a whole topic of
changing.
conversation too.
Right.
That's a big
That's
one.
another episode.
I want that one though, because it's so important to think about, again, that self-sufficiency, that self-reliance. as our climate changes, how can we stick with our self-reliance and our self-sufficiency to be able to grow all new plants from the trees down to the watermelons? It's gonna be a big topic here soon. I love this one that I was just put in. My 92-year-old mother confirms that it was standard practice to withhold an ingredient or two from shared recipes. So you would win. No, this is my own comment. So you would win the blue ribbon in the state fair. But she's now reporting with me the whole recipes. In addition, Carver's wife started the ladies of beekeeping at Tuskegee to aid in pollination and the plant propagation.
That's awesome.
That is awesome. That's write that one down so you can remember that for the next story. That's good. So that's very good. There's one more question, and I don't know if you feel free to share or not. What other books do you have on the bookshelf? Everybody's looking at they're not bobbleheads. I still can't remember what they are. But what other books do you have on your shelf that you can recommend?
Sure. So The Cooking Gene by Michael Twigg, which I mentioned, that book is amazing and incredible. Adrian Miller's Black Smoke, I would highly recommend if you're interested at all in barbecue and Black pit masters, barbecue star in Virginia. I would be remiss if I did not say that everywhere I go. So I would highly recommend that. We got a lot of books on spirits and whiskey, because I'm doing a lot of research on that for a project that'll be out soon. Gosh, what else do I have? Books about truffles and the underground nature of truffles and how it's illegal and very profitable at the same time. That's a really interesting word or book.
Okay, I got to go back to, how do you know Virginia was the birthplace of barbecue? Because that makes me smile after visiting Texas, and they're saying, no, they are the ones. So how do you, yeah.
Okay, so I've been researching this for going on 6 years. Okay. And so essentially the mix of enslaved Africans, indigenous people, and colonizers, that trifecta was not happening anywhere else in America. And so in the earliest records where barbecue is mentioned in conjunction with Virginia. So when we talk about, barbecue, and we go, oh, I want some barbecue. In the 1700s, you would say, I want Virginia barbecue. Those two words were joined together. They were never apart. And so as enslaved people were moved throughout the South and sold throughout the South, they brought those practices with them. And one of the selling tools, if you wanted to, have a barbecue, or you were selling a slave, if that person was a pitmaster from Virginia, that was one of their attributes, worked hard, knows about Virginia barbecue, was trained in the way of Virginia barbecue. So literally, every mention from when we first see barbecue in the late 1700s in documentation, it is in Virginia. It was not happening anywhere else. And even in Texas, thank you very much, they would put their advertisements in the paper for, we've got an original Virginia barbecue cook. Come see our Virginia barbecue cook. And so it absolutely, there's no other documentation that exists for American barbecue beginning anywhere else but in Virginia. And Texas cannot say that because they are smoking their meat versus direct heat barbecue. And they got that from Eastern European butchers who were smoking meat. So that's my very condensed Virginia barbecue answer.
Well, that just blows my mind, because you always think of North Carolina, all the other places. Virginia.
And North Carolina barbecue is actually Virginia barbecue. Eastern North Carolina barbecue is the same as Virginia barbecue. They have done much better job marketing their barbecue than we have. But we are rooted in community, not a commodity. But again, I'm getting on soapbox, so that is not what y'all came here to hear. So.
But it's fun to hear.
It is interesting to hear you talk about like the, barbecue is a community event versus like going to a store and purchasing it as a kind of a transactional event, Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah, yeah.
Absolutely. Yes. Virginia, if y'all don't take nothing else. Take that one.
I don't remember it, believe me. My husband's gonna hear about that because his family's from Texas. So that's great. We have a couple more minutes left. There's one more question that came up. When you talk to horticulturists of historic gardens, they mention the role of enslaved African Americans in growing vine crops. Can you discuss this, vine crops? So,
I mean, I think that that's interesting that they are calling out vine crops because enslaved African Americans were involved in every single agricultural aspect of any home plantation wherever they were. And so their role with so I'm thinking about grapes and obviously
mhm.
about their role with cider production and with wine production and beer production. Like that's kind of where my mind goes to. That was very, very prevalent. America's first brewmaster, if you will, was African American. He was enslaved at Monticello. His name was Peter Hemmings, and that Sally Hemmings' brother.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, that's a whole nother thing that we could talk about. So I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. And literally stopping myself from going down that.
Well, that will be the next presentation. How about that? I'd love to hear more about the spirits and the beer and the wine with the tradition, because that is so interesting to think about, because it has European connections. Now I'm learning it has African American connections, and I really would like to hear that story to go along for the rest. But Carla, any words of wisdom that you want to share?
Um, well, I do have a question that I hope is okay for me to ask. But Deb, do you have social media handle that you want to share with people so they can follow you and just get connected to you?
Yeah,
Yep.
you're allowed to ask that. That's good.
So that's me on Insta. I'm most active on Instagram, and so that's my Instagram handle right there.
Okay, and I'm gonna switch it over. Can I do that? I'm gonna copy it because you've done it just to host. So I'm
Oh,
gonna
my
do it for
apologies.
everyone
Sorry
and
about
see if I can do this. Yep, I did. Okay, there we go. So there it's listed now. Yeah, that's the tricky feature on the chat box. You have to get the listing right on it, which I hardly ever do. And I'm a terrible speller, so I really hate that it doesn't have spell check on there. So I want to thank you so much for allowing us to come into your home and ask you all these questions, and to thank you for doing this presentation that is just awesome to learn the history. We have to, I always say that the National Museum of African American History and Culture is my favorite museum because I was not taught the information that's in the museum when I was a kid. It was not, we were still George Washington threw the quarter over the Potomac. That's the type of things that they were sharing with us. So to be able to hear a history that is not as prevalent, and unfortunately may not be as prevalent in some states, it's wonderful that we have museums all over, but the one I get to visit is our National Museum. And Carla, I'm sure you have many special initiatives that are going to share more history in the future. And Deb, I know you're guaranteed for more awards in the future. And I look forward to reading a lot of the books that you've shared with us. And Carla, I'm jealous you already have them.
I share.
Okay.
This was great. And I just want to echo Cindy's sentiments. Thank you so much. Thank you for helping us launch this series. I'm seeing I'm seeing the feedback in the chat. They want more. We will have more. There will be another edition of Let's Talk African American Gardens next month. And I think we've already covered maybe 3 or 4 more topics you could cover with us in the future too. So we want to have you back.
I
I'm
agree.
there. I'm there.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
All right.
That's it. Yes, and Carla and I both have full-time jobs, but we're so glad to bring this topic to it. I wish I could do this all the time and not work on other special initiatives. This is where my heart goes with being able to share information, and this is information we need to hear, and this is information that is so relevant to current times, and I am glad we're sharing. So please join us next time. It'll take us a while to get more information up on the website, but we're working on it. Carla and I are working on it really hard. And we'd love to bring it to you. So thank you all. And
thank you everybody for joining. Yes.
Yes, yes, yes.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah. You are from the South. It's better than Pittsburgh. I'm Ewans. Thank you all, and we'll see you later. Bye-bye.